guys, Sam here from the Cincinnati Observatory. Today I thought I'd talk to you guys about one of my favorite topics in astronomy, and that's constellations. I love constellations because you can even make your own constellations, and they all have myths and stories associated with them, and I love storytelling. So what is a constellation? Well, I'm sure you guys already know. It's a group of stars that make a picture or a shape. So it's kind of like making a connect the dots pictures, but instead of using dots on a piece of paper, you're using stars in the night sky. And the cool thing about constellations is that people all over the whole world make them. So whether you go to Europe or Africa or Asia, they all make constellations, and they make constellations of the things that they're familiar with, which I think is really special. Now, one of my favorite constellations, and one that I'm sure you guys have seen before, is this one right here. So look very closely at that. Do you know what it is? I bet you've definitely seen it up in the night sky. It's the Big Dipper. Have you seen the Big Dipper before? So if we look closely, here in Ohio, we think the Big Dipper makes the shape of a big spoon up in the sky. Maybe like a ladle-shaped spoon. So take a look at those stars. Can you connect them to make a spoon? Does it look something like that? Yeah, I can totally see that, can you? That looks like the shape of the Big Dipper. But the special thing about the Big Dipper is that you can see it everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you go somewhere other than Ohio, they might think it looks like a different shape. So while we think it looks like a big wooden spoon, some people think it looks more like a fishing hook. Now, does that remind anyone of anything? If you've seen the movie Moana, it probably does. It probably reminds you of Maui's fishing hook. Now, if you've seen that movie, I want you to think back to it and remember when Moana is going to search for Maui. She gets on her boat, and how does she find him? She follows a constellation of his fishhook up in the sky. And guess what? That's the same constellation as the Big Dipper. But because Moana is from the Pacific Islands, she doesn't think that the Big Dipper looks like a giant wooden spoon. She thinks it looks like Maui's fishhook. And if we were to travel to Canada, we would maybe see that the Big Dipper could look like a caribou. Now, I don't see that one as much, unless maybe it's a caribou walking through very deep snow, because I don't see his legs. But are you ready for my favorite version of the Big Dipper? For this one, we have to add a couple of other stars, but if we do, we get Ursa Major, the big bear. Do you see the Big Dipper? So, the bowl part of the spoon is the bear's hip, and the handle part is the bear's tail. I want you guys to look very carefully at this bear. I know it's blue and it has stars and lines on it, but there is something else very strange about this bear. It has a body part that is not very typical for bears. What is it? That long tail, right? Bears don't usually have long tails. They have short, stubby ones. So that's so strange. Now the cool thing is there's actually a myth or a made-up story to explain how this bear got up in the night sky with such a long tail. There's actually a few different myths, so I'm going to tell you a story about how this bear got up in the night sky. Now this story, it takes a little bit from Greek mythology and from Native American mythology, and it's kind of its own little story. So how do we usually start stories? We say once upon a time, right? So once upon a time, a very, very long time ago, there was a village in the middle of a very deep forest. And this village was experiencing the worst winter ever. It was so bad that the snow wasn't up to their ankles. It wasn't up to their knees. It was all the way up to their belly buttons. And winter had lasted so long that they were running out of food. They had eaten all of the fruits and vegetables that they saved from their fall harvest. They had hunted all of the animals that lived near their village, and they were scared because they were worried that they were going to run out of food. And this was a long time ago, so there was no such thing as Kroger down the road. They couldn't just go buy more groceries. So what they decided to do was to send their bravest, strongest hunter way out into the woods to look for food for them. So he packed his bows, he packed his arrow, and he set off. And he walked and he walked and he walked. And he walked and he walked and he walked. He had to hike a very long way because they had been hunting all around their village. And eventually he came to a spot where his path went between two very tall mountains. And there, right smack dab in the middle of these two mountains, was the biggest, scariest, what do you think it's going to be? It was the biggest, scariest bear he had ever seen. Now, a good rule of thumb with constellations is you have to be very good at using your imagination. So while this is a very cute, small bear, we have to imagine that is an enormous, terrifying bear. This bear is the size of a house. It is so large that our friend the hunter can't climb over the bear. He can't go under the bear. He can't even squeeze around the bear. Now, at this point in our story, it's important to know 3 facts about the hunter. The first is that he is very brave. The second is that he's incredibly strong. The third is that even though he's very brave and very strong, he's not particularly smart. Because the smart thing to do would be to hunt this bear, right? If she's the size of an entire house, that could feed his whole village. But that's not what he did. Instead, he walked up to this bear, the biggest bear that anyone had ever seen, put his hands right on his hips, and said, "Bear, you're in my way, move." Well, who knows what do bears do all winter? That's right, they sleep, they hibernate, right? So this bear was asleep, and our friend the hunter just woke her up. Very rudely, I might add. And I don't know about all of you, but I am very grouchy in the mornings when I get woken up. And so was this bear. So instead of moving, she picked up her gigantic head, looked right at the hunter, and growled. Can you guys at home do your best bear growl? I think I could hear it all the way from here. So the hunter was a little bit frightened, so he stepped back, and he thought about it, and he decided, well, maybe I just didn't ask this bear nicely enough, because it's always important to be polite and respectful, right? So he decides to walk back up to the bear. And this time he says, "Oh, excuse me, Miss Bear, pretty please, with whipped cream and sprinkles and a cherry on top. Could you move just a tiny little bit to the left or just a tiny little bit to the right, and I'll just squeeze around you and be on my way." Well, the bear was still very grouchy from being woken up. And she doesn't know what sprinkles are because, she's a bear. So instead of moving, she picked up that gigantic head, looked right at the hunter, and did the loudest bear growl ever. Can you guys do your loudest bear growl? Are you ready for mine? Here it comes. It's going to be terrifying. Rah! Were you scared? I bet you were. Our hunter was. So our hunter steps back, and he thinks, 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 and he thinks. Now remember, our friend the hunter, very brave, very strong, but not very smart. So it's taken him a long time to think of a solution, and he doesn't know what to do until he hears another growl. Only this time it's not the bear, it's his stomach, because he's so hungry. So he decides there's only one thing I can think to do, and I better do it. So what he decides is to grab the bear by her short stubby tail, and he starts to spin her. And as she spins, her tail starts to stretch. And then it stretches some more. And then it stretches some more. Until her tail cannot stretch anymore. And this bear cannot spin any faster. And our hunter throws the bear way up into the night sky. And she lands in the stars and becomes that constellation, Ursa Major. But our story's not quite done, because our hunter still has to go find food. So he continues down the path until he hears the saddest sound. He hears some crying and whimpering, and he looks under a bush and finds the cutest, sweetest, littlest baby bear. Oh my gosh, look how cute it is. So our friend the hunter goes up to this little baby bear and says, "Little baby bear, why are you crying?" The little baby bear sniffles and says, "I can't find my mom." Uh-oh. What did the hunter just do to Mama Bear? Well, he feels so guilty, right? Because he threw Mama Bear up into the stars and made her a constellation. And he can't take care of this baby bear. He's just a hunter. And there's no way the baby bear can survive winter without Mama. So what do you think he does? He grabs baby bear by its short stubby tail and starts to spin baby bear. And as baby bear spins, his tail stretches and stretches and stretches and stretches until its tail is very, very long and it cannot stretch anymore. And then the hunter throws baby bear with all of his might, and the baby bear luckily lands right next to Mama and becomes not Ursa Major, but the Little Dipper, or Ursa Minor, the little bear. So it's a very silly story, but it's happy in the end because our mama and baby end up next to one another. Now, that is a very silly story, but there is an important reason to be concerned about these bears. So the tip of Little Bear's tail right there has a star in it named Polaris. And we sometimes call that star the North Star. And that star used to be very, very important because it is always, always in the north. It doesn't matter what season or what time of day or night, the North Star is always north. So before there were maps or GPS, people could use the North Star to find their way. So that's one of the reasons that people came up with constellations and came up with stories about those constellations so they could help use the night sky to navigate. Now, I'm going to challenge you guys to go out tonight or one of the next couple nights when it's clear, and look up in the night sky and see if you can find the Big Dipper. The Little Dipper is a little bit harder to find, so see if you can find the Big Dipper. And if you do, go to the edge of the Big Dipper's tail, or the edge of the bowl, and make a line out like this, and you'll be able to find the Little Dipper. And if you want, you can even see if you can find other constellations. And the best thing to do is to look at the stars and make your own constellations and come up with your own stories for how they got in the night sky. I hope you guys all have a great day, and don't forget to go outside and look up at the night sky.